What up, my fellow Knicks fans? This is your guy Marcellus Ease, and don't panic quite yet. Now, Carmelo Anthony sat down with Stephen A. Smith and gave his version of the truth into regards to many topics of the decisions he made throughout his career, and most importantly, his version of what really went on with the New York Knicks and his motives for signing certain big long-term deals throughout his whole career. First, let me say this. Melo, night in, night out, has always grinded. He's earned the respect of many teammates and many players throughout the league. When Melo was on the Knicks, he kept a great composure, especially with the media, throughout all the chaos, the coaching changes, the player changes. He understood the New York City grind. He did not take any quote-unquote load management nights, and he also brought basketball back to New York City. One of the very few stars that was willing to come to New York with all the pressure and anxiety that being the captain of the Knicks comes with. But with that said, there was a few inconsistencies in the interview. We can only go by a man's actions and his words. So we'll go over the key parts of the interview where those two things just don't add up.
He was talking about your game. He was talking about your intent, how hard you work, how bad you want it, et cetera, and what ultimately dictated the decisions that you've made throughout your career. Here's what I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at that 5-year, $80 million contract. I'm going to look at 5 years later, a 3-year, $65 million deal with the Nuggets. I'm going to look at 3 years after that, a 5-year, $124 million deal with the New York Knicks. Nobody's trying to spend your money. Nobody's telling you you can't take that money. That's ridiculous. You take the money. But one would ask the question, you had opportunities on multiple occasions to put yourself in a situation to go after the chip and instead elected to go after the money. To that you say
with who though? Who was my options?
Well, again,
the Miami situation, that was just an idea, right? Mm-hmm. That wasn't even, that was just an idea stages, right? And I was about to sign shortly after that conversation, right? The New York Knicks situation, I was going to Chicago. Derrick Rose, Joakim Noah, I was there, right? I was there. And then I started getting whispers behind the scenes. Yo, look, this person ain't gonna be there. It ain't really right. This and that. And it was all of that started to come up in the midst of my decision making. I wasn't gonna let anything cloud that. I met with New York last. They was the last team I met with because I knew that I was ready to move on from that situation because of what I was dealing with and going through in New York. After that, I met with New York, the last meeting, and said, tell me what you're going to do for the organization, for us to put a team together to go compete and try to win. That was my conversation with them. There's a lot of things that was promised, a lot of things that was said. And I said, you know what? Because I belong in New York, I'm going to roll with you. I'm going to roll with you.
That sounds great. It's believable. But the flip side to it is that people will look at it and they will say, Carmelo Anthony, you've been in the league for 16 years. You've been to one conference championship. You've never played in an NBA Finals. Your man, LeBron James, 9 NBA Finals, 3 championships. D. Wade, your other brother, 5 NBA Finals appearances, 3 championships.
Can't compare.
That's right. Can't compare. How do you feel about that? How does that make you feel, particularly when you're in their presence?
As a competitor, it makes me feel like, damn, why not me? What's going on? But on the flip side of that, I've never been put in those situations before. I've never had the teams that LeBron James has had. I've never had the teams that D. Wade has had. I've never had the teams that a lot of these stars out there has had. It was always been me.
But what responsibility do you have with that? Because one could argue, even though you ended up forcing your way out of New York, you could have potentially done that sooner.
They forced me out of New York.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, people like me were begging you to leave or what have you. But you wanted to stay in New York, even when it was clear they were not going to be a part of the championship equation.
Right. I was naive. I believed in them so much.
You believed in the New York Knicks. I want to make sure outside the pause.
I believed in what I was saying.
Okay.
What was told to me.
Okay.
I believe what was told to me, and I was naive to anything else.
Now, at the very end of that soundbite there, you seen Stephen A. Smith get into his character mode as he normally does with Max Kellerman when he goes like, that little character mode. Because what Melo said at the very end right there did not sound believable at all. I believed in the New York Knicks. We talking about 2014 when the Knicks did not have any draft picks for 2016, 2014. They barely had cap space. They were not in the championship contention. And he signed a long-term deal with the Knicks. Those things don't add up. To say you believe in them, Stephen A. Smith was kind of leading him on to correct himself and sound a bit more believable. I'm going to go back to that bit so you can hear it.
But you wanted to stay in New York even when it was clear they were not going to be a part of the championship equation.
Right, I was naive. I believed in them so much that
you believed in the New York Knicks. I want to make sure outside the pause.
I believed in what I was saying.
Okay.
What was told to me.
Okay.
I believe what was told to me, and I was naive to anything else.
Now, also in the beginning of the soundbite, Melo had stated that he met with the Knicks last, and he made it seem like, they made promises to him and that he had options besides the Knicks, and sort of like he was doing them a favor. Now, we all know Melo feels the type of way because the Knicks forced him out. So now when things come into light, he makes it seem like New York was the last choice. But the reality is the Knicks was the only choice. Remember that Melo summer tour when he was hopping on the private jets flying in different cities? He finally got to be a free agent and got to see what it feels like. Let's look at his stops on the Melo summer tour. He went to Houston, he went to Dallas, he went to LA, and then he flew to Chicago, and then he came back to New York. Chicago was the only place in which he could really compete for a championship, but then he would have to take less money. Maybe even take a short-term deal and then make it back up when he signs an extension with Chicago. So that'll be a risky choice because it's not a guarantee Chicago will win a championship. But outside of that, looking at Melo's actions, in 2013, he purchased a loft office space in downtown Brooklyn, and he wanted to be, quote unquote, the first tech pioneer athlete. He had big plans outside of basketball, which he needed to be in New York City in order to do. And this is a year before he knew he was going to opt out of his contract. I'm not sure if you guys remember that GQ article, Melo Means Business. I'm going to include the link below. There's a lot of great insight into Melo's mind frame, into what he was thinking around that time. And Melo was thinking big, but he was thinking big in New York City.
I met with New York the last meeting and said, tell me what you're going to do for the organization, for us to put a team together to go compete and try to win. Mm-hmm. That was my conversation with them. There's a lot of things that was promised, a lot of things that was said. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what? Because I belong in New York, I'm going to roll with you.
Now, here's another inconsistency. What the hell did the Knicks tell Melo in 2014 that gave him confidence that they could build a competing team going forward? The Knicks had the dead weight of Amari Stoudemire. They also had Andre Bajani's contract for another 2 years. The Knicks had no draft picks that same summer. They drafted Klay Anthony early in the second round, and then they also had another second round draft pick, which is Giannis's brother. That ended up not working out. And the Knicks didn't have a 2016 first round draft pick. The Knicks also depleted their team in order to trade for Melo, when Melo could have just took less money and signed a max deal with a brand new team, which would be the Knicks. But instead, he forced his way here and he got his extension. But with him doing that, the Knicks basically depleted their team. So what did the Knicks tell him to give him confidence? That should have been the follow-up question from Stephen A. Smith. And then Melo's reasoning at the very end, I'ma just roll with you. That's off of feeling. There's no basketball calculation made in that decision. And to answer Stephen A. Smith's question, there was no basketball answer. It was just, I'ma roll with you. He didn't really give anything there. But like Melo said, because I belong in New York, he was right about that. He did belong in New York because he already had business obligations in New York. Like I stated before, he purchased that loft. It used to belong to Brooklyn Industries. And if you've been around Brooklyn, New York City, there's this clothing store called Brooklyn Industries. He purchased their old office space in 2013, knowing that he was going to opt out in 2014. So he was right about that statement, because I belong in New York. Now in today's NBA, a lot of players want flexibility. They're taking 3 to 4 year deals instead of these max deals in order to maintain control of their fate and their destiny. And they don't want to be locked into bad teams and bad organizations in which they're going to take a brunt of the blame. So they have the wherewithal to know taking less money and maintaining flexibility for today's stars has much more longevity than taking these long-term deals. And it's very unfortunate, but Carmelo Anthony is a reference point for a lot of today's stars on knowing the negatives into taking some of these long-term deals.
I think one could argue that the biggest mistake you made was the 5-year, $80 million deal you signed with the Denver Nuggets in 2006. At the time, I had a television show. You came on the television show, quite frankly, and you were like, hey, I can't walk away from that kind of money. I was like, I was raised above, but I can't walk away from that kind of money. But it was a 5-year deal with no out. Whereas you could have positioned yourself to make sure you had an out in 2010 because it was never supposed to be Chris Bosh. It was supposed to be you, Wade, and LeBron. I've been saying that for years.
Correct.
And I think that's where you missed the opportunity. To that, you say what?
Immaturity, right? Growth from that situation. From a business standpoint, not understanding where the game was going at that particular time. And still having this street mentality of I'm not leaving no money on the table, right? I didn't truly understand it was going to be a lockout and what the lockout meant at that point in time, right? I love Denver. I wanted to be in Denver. I wasn't ready to leave Denver, right? All of this happened with me getting out of Denver my last season with the Denver Nuggets. When I started understanding a little bit more, oh, this player not going to be here. Oh, he's leaving. Oh, they're not going to pick his contract up. These are things that I'm getting behind the scenes. So now it was like, oh, I gotta do something.
But at that particular moment in time, LeBron and D Wade, even though you're tighter with them now than you may have been at that particular juncture, because obviously relationships grow, I'm quite sure they were in your ear to some degree. What did they say to you at that particular moment in time?
It was take the 3-year deal, right? It was take the 3-year deal. Let's see what happens. At that point in time, like I said, I was so naive to any of that. I didn't know the business of basketball back then. I didn't know what it meant to take a 3-year deal as opposed to a 5-year deal. I'm looking at, I'm not leaving 2 years worth of this money on the table. And I want to be here. I'm not doing it.
Now, Melo mentions being naive of the NBA business landscape back in 2006 when he was with the Denver Nuggets, which makes sense. You're a young NBA player, it's understandable. But here's where the inconsistency comes in. Melo makes the same mistake in 2011 by, instead of signing a new deal with the New York Knicks so they can maintain their current pieces and add Melo to the mix and go for a championship run, Melo opted to trying to force his way into New York by threatening to go to Brooklyn and get that extension. He didn't want to lose that money. So the Knicks end up depleting their team and getting Melo, and Melo, now he doesn't have the necessary pieces to do what he needs to do in order to be successful. And the same thing plays out once again when he opted out in 2014 and signed a 5-year deal with the Knicks, even though the Knicks didn't have any pieces. He can't say back then he was naive also, because in 2013 he did a business article with GQ saying that he's a businessman. He wants to be the first tech pioneer athlete. He purchases a loft in downtown Brooklyn to start a new business. He's making all these business decisions, but when it comes to these NBA contracts, he's not adding the same type of flexibility like his peers, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. Melo cannot say he was naive of the business in 2011 and also in 2014, especially in 2014. Because everyone knew that the salary cap in 2017 was going to jump and guys were going to be making a lot of money. Melo could have signed a short-term deal for 3 years, and then in 2017, even though at the age of 33, he could have re-upped his deal on a championship-level team for the same max dollars he was either earning, or he could have earned more than that. I mean, you look at guys in 2017 like Drew Holiday, JJ Redick, Paul Millsap, Gallinari, Serge Ibaka, Otto Porter. These guys were making almost the same amount of money as Melo or even more. You had JJ Redick making $23 million a year. He is nowhere near the talent of Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony should have signed a 3-year deal with the Knicks with a player option. And if worse come to worse, he can make the same amount of money on a championship team. I mean, the follow-up question from Stephen A. Smith was, you was not privy to the business back in 2006, so please explain 2011 and 2014. Why did you sign the same long-term deals with no out? When you got guys like Chris Paul, who's head of the Players Association since 2013, LeBron James, who's very business savvy, Dwayne Wade, same thing, very business savvy. When you got friends like that in your inner circle, especially for all the information that they know and how many years of friendships that they had by 2014, some of the business decisions Melo's still making as far as NBA contracts, it just doesn't add up. And even Stephen A. Smith kind of lets Melo know, with the circle you have, you should be more privy to what's going on in the NBA on and off the court. You should be able to maneuver through it financially and politically.
I got to get on you about that, though. I don't understand for the life of me how in God's name you can't deal with the politics when I mean, obviously you got more friends than the three that I'm about to mention, but in LeBron James, you've got the biggest iconic sports figure in the world right now.
Listen.
But I'm just talking about in terms of his approach, his intellect, the conversations y'all have. You got a guy in D. Wade that's an elder statesman. That's how he's viewed.
Right.
And then you got a guy like CP3. He's the president of the Players Association.
Right.
You know, I mean, you have very, very smart and accomplished friends in your inner circle.
Right, and we speak.
Right. So when you talk about politics, you haven't figured out a way to maneuver your way around that?
Once again, there goes Stephen A. Smith with that high-pitched vocal tone again when he mentions Chris Paul. He's kind of indirectly letting Melo know your level of talent and the connections that you have. Why are you in this position? It's because it's always been about the money. And it's great to see that today's superstars such as Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis are all willing to reject supermax deals from their current teams and join with new teams and take in less money in less years and have more flexibility to use their talents to get to the highest levels of the NBA game. But you guys stay safe. Peace.